Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fifth roundtable session in the second series of Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations. Tonight, our session is on responding to houselessness in our community. We'd like to use this opportunity to thank the funder of this program, the Edmonton Community Foundation, and they have made it possible for this program to continue this year. I would also like to note that we have live subtitles turned on. But if you are not seeing them, please make sure that they're turned on in your settings area. So we'll just wait a few more moments to get started, let a few more people join, and then we'll be on our way. All right. So once again, welcome to our fifth roundtable session in our second series of Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations. Tonight, our session is on responding to houselessness in our community with our guest speakers, Nadine Chalifoux and Susan McGee, and it's being moderated by Bryan Mwaka. So we'll do a land acknowledgement and I'll introduce our speakers in full, and then I'll hand it off. We are gathered here on Amiskwachee-Waskigan, traditional Treaty 6 territory of the First Nations and Métis Nation of Alberta, Zone 4. We respectfully acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this land for generations, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota, Blackfoot, as well as the Métis and Inuit. This land is and has been a welcoming place for all peoples who come to Edmonton and call it home. We recognize those Indigenous peoples who are still fighting for equality today, and we support them in the spirit of decolonization and reconciliation. We remain committed to honoring the struggle of our Indigenous siblings and joining with them to end injustice. Together, we call upon all of our collective honored traditions and ancestors to help us work in the spirit of community and understanding today and ever onwards. So why do we do land acknowledgements? We are all treaty people. Long ago, when the first settlers came to this land, they drafted treaties that the Indigenous people signed with goodwill and in good faith. Those settlers and settlers up until today have not always honored those treaties. The treaties were meant to honor the traditional land and way of life of Indigenous peoples, to ensure their rights and prosperity, and to build understanding and mutual cooperation. Today, we acknowledge the treaty land as a way to recommit to honoring the spirit of those treaties and to recognize the continued rights of Indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of this land. We recognize that many Indigenous peoples have been dispossessed of their land and traditional ways of life, and along with that, the prosperity that would have come along with it. We acknowledge the treaty to understand we each have a role to play as treaty people in reconciliation and in righting the historical wrongs that have taken place. We would also invite you to share your land acknowledgement based on the treaty area you're in the chat box below. So, a little bit about us. Since our establishment in 1993, the Centre for Race and Culture, CFRAC, formerly known as the Northern Alberta Alliance on Race Relations, NAR, has brought together diverse people with an interest in promoting and supporting individual, collective, and systemic change to address discrimination and racism and to encourage intercultural understanding. We take an intersectional approach, and our expertise spans workplace development, community building, research, and education. If you'd like to learn more about current events, projects, or activities, please visit our website or sign up for our newsletter. This session is part of a new initiative called Challenging Discrimination Through Community Conversations, an ongoing series of online moderated roundtables and webinars with guest speakers from diverse communities, organizations, academia, and the general public. We seek to understand and address experiences of discrimination and exclusion in the Canadian context. By shining the spotlight on different forms of discrimination, such as anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and discrimination against Asian communities, amongst other topics, we hope to encourage solidarity among groups and individuals interested in promoting social inclusion and equity. We'll have an upcoming session in January 2022 on ableism and accessibility. It will be on January 12th, same time. So now we're going to launch some polls on your screen, collecting anonymous demographic data. You don't have to answer, but if you do, it just helps us to understand who's coming to our events and the audience. So we'll just give you all a moment, and then I'll introduce our speakers. Okay, just give you a few more moments and we'll continue on. Okay, so first I'd like to introduce you to one of our speakers for this evening, Nadine Chalifoux. Nadine Chalifoux is an independent advocate with a multitude of lived experience and education. She is of Cree descent, and although an urban Indigenous woman, she has connected with her culture every chance she gets. Her advocacy for navigating the social, political, and health service systems for marginalized citizens of Edmonton includes advocacy for housing, homelessness, human rights, mental health, social injustice, indigeneity, and women's rights. This has earned her a 2019 ROOPH, recognizing outstanding organizations and people in housing award for advocacy. She advocates alongside Edmonton Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, ECOHH, on which she is a board member. As well, Nadine is an active member with End Poverty Edmonton, especially with the Indigenous Circle, which has had a huge influence on how End Poverty Edmonton governs with Indigenous teachings. She is also a peer navigator with the Edmonton Wellness Network at E4C. Her drive to help impoverished and marginalized citizens to obtain affordable housing is why she advocates independently. Next, I'll introduce you to our other speaker this evening, Susan McGee. Susan McGee is the CEO of Homeward Trust, the organization leading Edmonton's efforts to prevent and end homelessness in Edmonton. In 2009, Homeward Trust launched a Housing First support program that has helped more than 10,000 previously homeless individuals find a home, contributing to a 43% reduction in homelessness since 2016. The organization is committed to ensuring culturally appropriate services are available to address the overrepresentation of Indigenous peoples among Edmonton's homeless, funding Indigenous Housing First teams operated by Indigenous organizations, offering sector training, cultural services, managing and developing Indigenous housing, including Morning Fire Protector, a supportive housing project for Indigenous families and individuals. Homeward Trust has provided funding to over 1,900 units of housing and develops and manages permanent supportive housing that have on-site supports. In addition to her professional work, Susan has been an active member of the community, volunteering on various committees and boards, including the Board of Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, the CHRA Indigenous Advisory Committee, the ANPHA, and the Edmonton Community Foundation, among others. Ms. McGee received her BSc in architecture from Ryerson University, Toronto, and has an MBA through the Edinburgh Business School of Heriot-Watt University. She's a recipient of the Alberta Centennial Medal and the Diamond Jubilee Medal. Lastly, I will introduce you to our moderator for this evening, Bryan Mwaka. As the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Mustard Seed, Bryan's main goal is to create awareness about the work they are doing, as well as to break the stereotypes surrounding homelessness and poverty. Bryan did humanitarian work with an NGO in Uganda known as Watoto, and his main role was to help foster leadership skills with the next generation. The Mustard Seed is a Christian nonprofit organization that has been caring for individuals experiencing homelessness and poverty since 1984. Operating in 5 cities across Alberta and British Columbia, the Mustard Seed is a supportive haven where people can have their physical, mental, and spiritual needs met and grow towards greater health and independence. The idea for street ministry came from Pat Nixon, who founded the Mustard Seed in 1984, opening the first location in Calgary. Today, the organization operates in many cities, including Calgary, Edmonton, Red Deer, and Medicine Hat in Alberta, as well as Kamloops in British Columbia. All locations offer an expansive range of programs and services to help the most vulnerable community members. This is our panel for this evening, and I'm going to hand it off to Bryan, and we're going to learn some stuff. All right, thank you so much.
Awesome, awesome. Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. And if you're joining us online, be sure to join us in the chat. We're going to have a time for questions after our panelists speak, and will be awesome. It will be awesome to hear from all of you. All right, so we'll start off with our questions, and our first question, I think we'll start with Nadine. So our first question is, houselessness people are often underrepresented in disclosed regarding houselessness, or people who are experiencing homelessness. So how can we ensure that they have a seat at the table when it comes to their welfare?
That's a great first question. I think that for me, my personal experience and from what I know, it's very hard to include lived experience people because they often don't feel that they are actually being heard and what they're saying is actually being taken into account for change. So there's a lot of negativity around being part of a group when you're a lived experience person. When you're experiencing homelessness, you're in a survival mode. So really, all you can do is what you can for surviving. The reason that we want to include them is because we do want to make change, and there's a ton of organizations that are moving towards including lived experience people in their decision making and their policy making and their creation of new programs or types of housing. This is very important, but to get them there, it's hard. That's the trick. We have to figure out how to get them there the best and to keep them there. So a lot of organizations go to other organizations who work with people who are homeless or recently housed, and they ask them to, if they would be interested in being a part. A lot of people, when they're sharing their experience, this is a personal, very vulnerable thing that they're doing when they're on the panel. So they want to know that it's a safe, secure space. And most places it is. We just have to do a better job at securing that safe, secure place for them. And then we'll have more lived experience people. I would love, honestly, to see every kind of board or any kind of organization that's in houselessness or trying to find new housing, affordable housing. I would like to see a 50% lived experience table at each of them.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Nadine. Susan, any take on that one?
Yeah, and I'll first start with, I apologize if there's background noise. I've tried to manage my my mic as good as possible. I'm at a place where there's some background noise. And I want to start by thanking everybody for being here. And I really appreciated the explanation of the land acknowledgement in the beginning, because a lot of times we don't have that moment to really kind of reflect on the importance of it. So thanks, Serafina, for doing that. And good to see you, Nadine. I think what I would add to that, and it's reflected, I think, in some of Nadine's comments, is that when we talk about the inclusion of that voice, we're often, talking very generally, and there's different areas and aspects of work that we should be talking more precisely about. So, there's policy discussions. There's also the experience of a kind of a service relationship where folks often are receiving services and they don't have a formal way of saying, kind of, this is how my experience of receiving those services. And then there's also the leadership role that folks with lived experience can contribute to. And I think that, when we have this discourse about just engagement, and I really appreciate, like, what does that 50% look like? I just would suggest that we start to become a little, nuanced about the different ways, because I actually think one of the areas that we struggle with the most is listening to folks who are receiving services and how they're receiving those services and translating that in a way that we can, really be informing how we deliver what we do now. And then there is, obviously it has to matter. Nadine touched on that. So, folks get asked to participate in conversations, but if it's not informing change and if they don't feel that their recommendations are heard, and honestly, that can be tough because it's like, we got to sometimes there's a process through which that advice that we get through our participant advisory council, for instance, goes through, steps of, okay, so what do we do with this advice? It's not always like an immediate pivot to what we're doing, but it has to matter. So we have to go a step further and be clear about how it matters. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Susan. Yeah, that is very important because again, the last thing that you want to do is just, point fingers to what everybody should do rather than hearing from the people who are actually going through the situation and, finding out how best it can be channeled. And as we continue, just a reminder, please feel free to share your name again and the position and the land acknowledgement as well in the chat. That would be really, really, really good. All right, so for our next question, what are some of the contributing factors that can lead to houselessness? What are some of the contributing factors that can lead to houselessness? Nadine, do you want to start off?
That's a really tough question because you have your generic ideas of what is going to become, you're going to become homeless. For example, losing your job, losing your house, all of those things. But what you don't see is that anybody in any position can lose their home and become homelessness. That was actually my experience. I was sick. I had to go to the hospital for a while, couldn't work. And the place I was living at decided that I didn't honor my rental agreement. And so they took my house, my apartment. And so I had nowhere to go. I had barely anything left. And I mean, before I got sick, I was a manager at a large organization. And I was, making great money, but because of my situation, I used up all my savings to survive. I didn't know where to go or what to do, and I didn't get the help I needed from the hospital before I left. And so that's a really big trigger. But there's so many other things that can help. Multitude of issues, for example, mental health issues, and that can even include just simple depression and anxiety can help lead to homelessness because, if you're depressed, you're not going to do things. If you're anxious about everything, well, you're just going to be questioning everything. So all these things contribute. There's addictions, there's, and I never say this right, intergenerational trauma, that's the word. So for Indigenous people, but people come to the city from small towns, where are they going to go? So there's so many, it's not just one thing, it's not just one idea of how you become homeless. There's too many ways.
Thank you very much, Nadine. Yes, Susan.
Yeah, and I think as important as the question is, I think it's important for us to reflect on why we ask it the way we ask it often. I think from one space, the fact is many people experience homelessness for a short period of time, resolve it on their own and never experience it again. And so we have that reality, and then we have the experience of the compounding contributing factors. So it's not just the housing crisis. It's not just the lost opportunity to make, just some of it can be triggered by an economic or financial crisis, but it's the compounding things then of not having intervening or supportive services that usually end up in what actually becomes chronic homelessness is homelessness re-experienced over and over again, and a hopelessness then that just it erodes, it becomes a ton of work. also just to try to get basic needs met. So I think the way we ask the question sometimes is because we think if we can solve that, like, you know, what is the journey? Everybody has their own journey, but I think acknowledging the fact that some folks do experience a housing crisis and never experience chronic homelessness. But what happens when somebody becomes homeless, and that then compounding issues, and, you know, Nadine, you spoke to that, you know, just the failure of all of the other things that might have changed that trajectory. And now human beings are just like really, really struggling against all odds to reverse something. And I think that reality and acknowledging that there's a tipping point, I know that's such a cliche thing to say, but there's a point where now we're now actually doing harm from a system as opposed to the potential to do good, right? Like, you know, and I think that is an important part of asking the question, because we ask it because sometimes we just think that if we can figure that out, we'll have like an easy solution, you know, but it's actually the fact that we, by design, make it harder to get out of homelessness at some point. You know, there's like somewhere along that journey, it gets harder to get out of homelessness than it would have been earlier on with a little bit of help.
Thank you so much, Susan. And I like what both of you said, and the fact that, you know, you are looking at how we ask the question, because again, it's very easy to come up with a solution. You're like, okay, we have the solutions, but it's not about the solution. And as both of you have mentioned, everybody has a story. So it's a journey. And sometimes, you know, I think about it also from a point of broken relationships, you know, because the different factors and, you know, the reasons as to why somebody will end up there, like there are numerous factors, because everybody has a journey, you know. But again, I also look at it as, you know, broken relationships, relationship with yourself, relationship with the land, relationship with your community, you know, those small things can really, you know, snowball into somebody ending up there. So that's very important, and it's a very, very important question. And, you know, how we look at it, how we answer it, how we address it is very, very important. Awesome, thank you so much. And just a reminder again, there's going to be time for questions. So if you have any questions, make sure that they are at the tip of your fingers. All right, we're going on to a third question, and this is to do with affordable housing. What is affordable housing? And how can we use affordable housing to work towards more inclusive communities? Nadine, do you want to take us off again?
Oh my God, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
It's a controversial question as well, especially among housing agencies. Because what is affordable housing? Well, there's so many different explanations for what it is. However, the overall perception of affordable housing is that people can actually afford to pay their rent and live and have decent quality of life. However, affordable housing has so many different levels, different aspects. It's a tough one. I personally don't even like the word affordable housing or affordable, because it's so vague. I think that there should be a different term. I can't tell you what I think of it should be, but it should be something much more accurate. But overall, I mean, technically I live in affordable housing, a social housing group, and my rent is subsidized. However, if I were to move, that subsidy doesn't move with me. So then I would have to reapply, which I may not get. So then I'm out of affordable housing and paying probably all my income towards my rent, which is hard. There's also community housing, which is always full. That's 30% of your income, which is a lot better. That to me would be more affordable, because then you're paying what you literally can give towards your housing. However, that's not a sustainable system, sadly. I wish it was. I wish it was really good, but it's not. So affordable housing, I just don't like the term. If we could actually nail down a true affordable housing system, even just in Edmonton, we could deal with inclusion, accessibility, human rights aspects to affordable housing. But I don't think we can do all of that yet.
Thank you so much. So Nadine, so when you say another word for affordable housing, would low-income housing work?
Again, there's so many different levels right now because we call the market that you pay your rent at whatever the level is out there at the time. So say a 1-bedroom is roughly right now about $1,000, right? So that's called market rent. And then there's near market rent where you're about 80% of that. And then it just goes down, but those fluctuate. So it's hard to say if they're really going to be affordable housing. Low income would be more accurate, but it would have to still have a definition, of an accurate definition to say what level, what percentage is actually affordable housing in our current time.
Awesome. Thank you, Nadine. Susan, what is affordable housing and how can we use affordable housing to work towards inclusive communities?
Yeah, okay. Well, so that I'm very interested in the second part of the question, getting some time, because I think the what is it, there's policy measures, right? It's 30% of your income ideally, but also when we do needs assessments, we look at like Edmonton needs another 50,000 units. Like, that's a lot of units, but that's just based on like a level of, folks not having to decide between rent and food. Right. So, there's a lens around how we define it in terms of a percentage of income. But as Nadine said, I mean, that's also, until it's really deep subsidy for a lot of individuals, 80% below market when market's so unattainable is such a false measure. It really is such a false measure. And I'll be frank. I mean, I think it does give us from a program space, we get to open projects and say we've opened an affordable housing project and people can feel good about that. But it's really like $150 less a month than the market would be saying. So it's a false measure, honestly. But I think when we think about affordable housing, we'll only get over that when we start to think about it as part of our infrastructure, not in a policy space of social infrastructure needs even, but really economically, housing is very expensive. Costs of building it, land is expensive. And until we kind of really look at it as part of our infrastructure, that there's a percentage of our housing that needs to be far more than less than 10% of market in order for people to not have to make that choice between food and rent and do those numbers. But we kind of like the need becomes so overwhelming that we do these like incremental little feel-good steps, but it is the need is really high. I think how do we help make it part of an inclusive community is an interesting question in that I probably have an unpopular opinion about this, because I think it is as much about developing quality and having lots of projects and having those projects really fit into community, but also having really well maintained and integrated projects. We've got some developments that we've done over time, and particularly in the 70s, where they're like very large and they in of themselves are not really integrated in the neighborhoods that they're in. So if we rethink how we develop new projects and make them kind of really oriented to be just part of the neighborhood, and I do think Edmonton is very much oriented to that, but we've made decisions decades ago where we still have, larger projects that are stereotyped or, not really considered part of the rest of the community fabric. And we've learned a lot, and I'm really confident actually that we've learned a lot and we can do things differently. But the deficit of housing, like the amount we're talking about, even, and it's crazy because we talk about nationally billions of dollars. Well, that's because we've done nothing for so many decades. So we have so far to go. And until we actually reframe that in terms of the rest of the way we talk about infrastructure, like roads and other things, it's going to feel like overwhelming, but it really is like just something that should be, we need to think about it really differently in order for it to be not, on a project by project basis. Don't want them in my backyard. I mean, we've come a long way with some of those conversations, but the reality is that sometimes it's still housing that's positioned as, and that the language of low income. I think that whole space around developing projects should, whatever we do policy wise, should be oriented to really believing in the potential of people and not some kind of casting of them at even a point in their life. I think the more folks can, when we develop projects that really see people as contributing members of their community, regardless of their income, and we move away from that language, I think that's important too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susan. And, that kind of segues into our next question, and this goes out to you, Susan, first. How has the approach to solving houselessness changed over the years?
So very interesting times for us in the pandemic, particularly, and in how we're regrouping around the additional pressures and the increased experiences of folks. And I know I will oscillate between the homelessness and houselessness language, and we can talk about that sometime too. It's respectfully, I think that sometimes the terminology isn't always totally reflective of how people identify, but I appreciate that the emphasis on a person-centered. It's the experience right now, not who they are, or who I might be at some point. And so when we think about how that has changed, is that we really, until about 15 years ago, I would say, didn't have conversations. And it's not like there's this big pivot or aha moment. We really didn't have a certain, really clear conversations that homelessness was solvable, that it was the outcome of intentional policy. We didn't talk about it in terms of the system, and even then that part has evolved. But we had a real idea that somehow, and it was very paternalistic, that if we just transitional housing language of people needed to learn how to be housed, that was the primary kind of conversation around projects, right? If we give people enough supports, then they can learn how to have housing. And there's actually a big shift in evidence around that. I mean, the fact is, some folks do really well in a more institutional kind of relationship to their shelter, but then when they have an apartment, they didn't actually do more to be able to retain that apartment. So the housing first language that we've kind of really embraced is very much about that. It's that people need support, but for that support to matter, they first need to have housing security, and they need to be able to have a place where they are also able to make their own decisions around a lot of things. Like self-determination is fundamental, and that sometimes it's not just choice, right? Like my furniture, the art on my wall, the time I come and go, and acknowledging rights in terms of a tenant. You have rights under the RTA if you're in a housing first program, versus you're in a program and you can only stay in that program and have that roof over your head as long as you're compliant to that program. So I think that shift has been really, really significant and great. I think really fundamental shifts have happened because of it. I'm appreciating right now how tenuous that is, when we also as a community have increases in the number of folks who are experiencing homelessness that have really complex needs. And it feels overwhelming to think about how the system should be responding. So I also just want to acknowledge, and perhaps with some vulnerability, that we're in a very challenging situation with the pandemic and how much it has contributed to folks losing their housing, sometimes for the first time, but also, eroding that safety net that they may have had around, natural supports or family, but in some cases just, relationships. And so, but I think the most important thing in all of that journey and how it's changed has been to really reimagine the possibility that homelessness is something that we can solve.
I like that. Thank you so much, Susan. Yes, Nadine.
Yeah, those are very good points. First off, homelessness is a crisis, and we need to understand that it really is a crisis and it can be solved. And definitely it's all in our approach and how we do it. And over the last 40 years, we've definitely moved ahead somewhat, but I would have thought by now we would have moved a lot more from 40 years ago, because 40 years ago, my mom was poor and she was raising me and my sister on income assistance or welfare in the city here. And there wasn't a lot of help then. And then when I ended up homeless, I felt like I was in the exact same position, even though I didn't have a house, my mom had an apartment, that there was nothing out there to help me. So our services are a very big part of moving ahead. The thing is when you're homeless, again, you're in survival mode. So you have to go through a transition before you can go into a place of your own. The transition is very helpful. I found it helpful myself, but not enough, unfortunately. When I moved into my first place, and I'll say this, but I was actually a Housing First recipient. So I got to go through Homeward Trust's program, and it helped, but I needed other assistance. I needed other services to help me. I needed other programs to help me continue, because for 3 years, I fought being homeless again because I wanted to go back there because I felt safer. I knew the surroundings. I was comfortable with where I was, and I had people that I could trust and rely on that protected me. They were kind of like family, something I didn't have, which is why I was homeless. I didn't have a support system. And to have that when you move into your home after being homeless, whether it's you're homeless for 6 months or 15 years, you know, it's a survival mode that you have to work out of, and it's hard. So those services need to be present. I think that when we're housing people, we need to understand that even moderate housing, where people don't get the services, they're not around them, is to have somebody that they can go and talk to that can help them find those services. They have somewhere that they can go to that they can get questions answered. A lot of the system is very intimidating for people who are homeless and just recently housed. And to keep them housed, we need to remove the stigma. It's all about stigma, really. And then we can actually make some headway and move forward. One thing I've noticed in the last 5 years, however, and I've been housed 8 years now. So in the last 5 years, I've noticed that there are so many more organizations, agencies that who vie for and fight for funding just because they need to keep running, are coming together and working together to find those solutions. They're collaborating and sharing information they have. They're having those conversations to work together to provide those services for people. They're having those conversations to say, you know what, this is not good. And they're including those people with lived experience. Because without the people, how do you help a person who's moving into their first home after being homeless? How do you help them when you don't know what their experience is? And I mean, we all have different experiences, but the overlap of our experiences is the exact thing that needs to be shared with organizations. And I see it moving forward. I like to see it move faster. I'm not patient, but but those key points, I mean, those things together would really help. I always believed that when you get housed, that you should have a 5-year wraparound plan of services so that you can gradually move out of needing those services at a time. Once I hit 5 years of being housed, and it was a struggle, like I said, struggle right through. But once I hit 5 years, I was finally finding myself and being myself and able to do things. But I also reconnected with people from my community that things I didn't get to use when I was younger, things I didn't get to share. So these were key points. And those are things that we really need to provide for people who are housed.
Thank you so much, Nadine. And you know, I resonate with you as well. I'm very new to Canada, moved here, and you know, I ended up homeless, and it was the pandemic, full-blown lockdown, nothing to do, and you know, I go through an agency and I get housed. But then I get housed and I have no support system. So I had to scramble to get whatever I needed to get, or whatever services I needed to get in order to actually survive in the house that I was given. You know, and you know, I think about a house as a shell, because it's very easy to put someone in that shell, but to keep someone in that shell, there is a lot more that needs to come along with that. And that, again, is something that, you know, can be discussed on a longer table. But, you know, those services are very, very important. But, you know, apart from the services, you know, just like we've all mentioned, community is one of the biggest things. Earlier this year, I was able to just go back on the street for a night, just to get the feel, what's going on the street. And it's amazing how you feel when you're on the street. Yes, you're in survival mode, but there's a sense of community that you can never, I don't know where you can get that from. And it's very hard to explain that. It's a feeling that you can never find elsewhere, until it's something that right now, you know, even being where I am in the apartment building where I'm at, we're trying to create that sense of community. You know, the person right next to you, are they able to knock on your door and know that, you know what, I can knock at whatever time and we'll be able to, you know, get help from this person, you know? And if someone needs, for example, the other day, my neighbor was not feeling well and she asked me to take her kids to school. And actually, can someone be able to reach out to you? And I think, you know, a home is a place where you find people who you can relate with. A house is just a shell, and we can provide housing, but we need to provide homes for people. And what that looks like, you know, again, with the questions that we have answered, what does that mean to bring people at the table so that they contribute to their welfare, you know, and, you know, so different factors. So I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because again, it just helps us, you know, just learn more, get more ideas, and see how best we can, you know, make this something that can be a solution as well. All right. Okay, so for our last question, how can we support community members experiencing houselessness? And what are some of the tangible ways we can be advocates through allyship? Susan, I'll let you go on with that one. Maybe should I repeat the question, or how we good with that?
Well, I appreciate who's ever really on top of the presentation, because they put it up. So my attention span is, no, I appreciate that. Yeah. You know, so supporting folks while they're experiencing homelessness can have, you know, a couple of different responses to that. I mean, people have immediate basic needs. I think listening to people and believing what they say is really important. I think that we have folks experiencing homelessness that have repeatedly shared how challenging it is to access services and how and why, and it's really important that informs what our work is. I think I sometimes, like, you know, we really do need to balance how we can make sure that conversation ultimately is about supporting a longer term plan to access housing. And there's that balance that while somebody is experiencing homelessness, they are in crisis. And that I think empathy, I mean, I don't want to be kind of all over the map on that, but empathy is super, super important when we think of the number of people that have ended up in this housing crisis, as Nadine has named it. And I want to also acknowledge, Nadine, when you say, like, I'm impatient, like, you should be. Like, none of us should be patient about this work. And also providing solutions so that the conversation and the engagement and supporting people that are in an experience of homelessness also means providing really tangible options that can be delivered on. You know, and this may not feel great, but I know that some of the work involves relationship building and involves building trust. But I've sometimes used the analogy that, you know, someone doesn't need to trust that you know what they take in their coffee, or they know you, but they do need to trust that when you say that you can get them housing, that you actually can. So there's this kind of relationship that's important to support folks and to absolutely meet them where they're at. But there's also some of what we need to be able to do and show up when we say that we can support folks, that we absolutely will follow through on that. And that's what we try to like really kind of in the Housing First program. And although, you know, it is that intervention work, and it isn't as long as we'd like to see it. And we do know that the intervention is like to get somebody from a crisis to shore, so that hopefully we've got the system responding, and it's not always doing that. But in that, we really need to absolutely deliver on our promise. And that we're engaging folks in a conversation that is like, we're not making it like, it's not just empty promises. And because I really do believe that people don't intentionally make empty promises, but if we can focus on the genuine commitment that's needed to engage people in a solution and be sure that we can do that. And I think that that's the most important thing I would like to see us preserve in the work that we're doing in our community, is that there is a really, you know, frontline staff that can help you find an apartment and sign a lease. And when we start to become bureaucratic, or we start to kind of feel like I can't show up and meet my side of that promise, that my side of that commitment, that's wrong. So I really think an important part of what we can do for folks is make sure that we show up in the way that we should in the commitments we make.
Awesome. So that's trust, empathy, relationship, follow-up, and commitment. Nadine.
Those are definitely good goals. Absolutely. Supporting community members experiencing houselessness. You have to bring them into your community. You have to become a community and include them right from the start. There can't be that judgment because you don't know what their situation is. You can't walk in their shoes to find out. So you need, like Susan said, trust. But trust goes both ways, and it's really hard for a person experiencing houselessness to trust somebody to help them when during their journey, and this is probably across the board. I know I've experienced it. I'm probably pretty sure Bryan's experienced it, but you have people, groups that maybe unintentionally, but they berate you. Like, you know, police come at you and tell you, you can't sleep here, or you can't do that. Well, literally, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? You're not feeling well, you go to the emergency room, they tell you that they're not going to help you, or you wait longer than someone else who came in pretty much in the same situation. You get those judgments, and that makes you lose trust in the system. And if you lose trust in the system, it's extremely hard to bring it back and have someone say, we're going to find you a house. Because my first response is, I really don't see that happening, or I don't believe you, or yeah, right. Let's see that happen. And then there's the fact that, you know, as a person experiencing houselessness, you're expected to do the work to prove that you should have a house, that you deserve a house. And I think that format is wrong, because it shouldn't be that you have to prove it. There's definitely work you probably have to do to fill out certain criteria to get one, because there's very few around to even have. We still need to remove so much judgment. So allyship would be community for sure. There needs to be more community, less stigma, less NIMBYism. Education, I think, would be really well. I know a bunch of lived experience people that speak at social worker classes to help them understand from their perspective how they feel social workers are working and treating them. And that has somewhat shifted the way of thinking that they're teaching the course of social worker. So this is helpful. Things like that that start to build that bigger allyship, that bigger trust, that bigger actuality of the system changing and helping people and helping them be able to move from one to the other, from being houseless to being housed, and then to move forward to have your home, have your community, have relationships, have families. It's a long struggle that needs to be shortened for sure, but definitely I think we can do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Nadine and Susan. Thank you so much for being part of this. And, you know, one of the things that I have a heart for is people. And I always tell people that I studied IT, but what I'm doing right now is my calling. Your career, you can always go through your career and you can resign from your career or you can build it. But when you have a calling, that is something that goes on for legacy and goes on for generations. So one of the things I always tell people is when you are dealing with people, these are human beings, you're not dealing with machines, you're not dealing with, you're dealing with people who have hurts, you're dealing with people who have a story. And again, they were once children, and some of them do have children and they have a legacy to keep. So it's very, very important how you treat those people and how you handle them. So thank you very much. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for being part of this. We have some questions. Please, if you have some questions out there, please join us and just drop them in the chat right now. And I have one question here. Question one says, so it's from, it says that I am in an urban rural community outside of Calgary, and we have a mix of unhoused and couch surfing individuals in need of housing. There is a real need of housing, and there's a real need, and there's a real shortage of 1 or 2 bedroom affordable rentals. Have you heard of any innovative solutions to address the shortage of available affordable housing? Anybody can go. Nadine, you can start.
Okay. And can I do a check here, because I didn't realize that in my meeting I switched. Is it better? Is my mic better? Because it's been horrible for everybody. I'm so sorry. Something happened that it flipped to my computer mic from my headset, and I feel like such a jerk. I'm so sorry, because it's increasingly loud in the public space I am. So I apologize. So, but Nadine, I'll just, since I'm talking anyway, I'm just going to mention that I'm really probably feeling more hopeful than I have in a long time around a couple of fronts with our national commitment to end chronic homelessness, but also having a national housing strategy. I think homelessness is talked about nationally and in the House more than I've seen it in my pretty long career around, trying to advocate or just working in an advocacy space around homelessness and housing. And having said that, the election campaign, we've got some federal partners like the Housing Renewal Association and the Canadian Alliance on Homelessness that have been trying to get this vote housing thing across. So I think the more we can really continue to amplify that and hold feet to fire, because I think it's been given, I want to be hopeful, because it's been given not just more kind of certainly advocacy and space, but more precision about how do we get there. And it isn't I'm really trying to resist the narrative that it's complicated and hard, because it actually is you build stuff and you got to subsidize it. There's no way around it. Nobody gets special math. It has to be subsidized, and we have to do it to scale. And I think that, what I'm crossing my fingers that everything that's happened that I've seen over the last 3 years around that planning work, and then, you know, like more recently, kind of just more precision about programs. But I do want to demystify the idea that it's complex or it requires a whole bunch of pretzeling. Like, we just need to build it. We just really need to build it. We know how to build things. That's not hard.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, Nadine.
I'd love to stay as positive and think forward like that too. I feel so bad for urban or for rural places, because if the cities have 2,500 people on a waiting list for an affordable housing or a low income, and they're having trouble housing them, how can a rural community who gets less funding, has less space to do the same thing? It's a hard factor. In rural areas, it's really more about the community coming together to provide that help, that support, that work. Building houses is definitely one way to start. I don't know. I think, like I said, education is definitely one way to move forward and help not just the urban areas, but the rural areas. Plus, we have more advocates and more advocacy groups out there now. And especially even for the rural or the urban and the rural, they both have their own groups that they need to be more implemented into those towns, into those communities, so that these people know that there's someone there. Couch surfing is still homelessness, because you do not have a home. If you do not have a home, doesn't matter how you're trying to survive it, you're still homeless, and that's the crisis. And that's also the education we need to share, that we need to help these people. Indigenous people believe that community is the key to survival. The community is the key to pure life. It's aunties and uncles and grandparents that raise the children, while their parents, both female and male, go out and do the hunting and the foraging and do all of the other hard work, while the kids are being taught by generations. When one family is suffering, they don't have enough to eat, the rest of them come together and share what they have, that they can help the other people out. This is the sense of community. So whenever I see like the word community, I think that it's false, because you need to have a sense of community to be a community. And that means helping each other, taking the burden off of someone who is having so much burden. You don't have to have much. It's not like you need to go and buy them a home or you know, buy them all this stuff. No, it's not about that. It's about safe food. Food is the biggest insecurity with homelessness and people who are in poverty. You need to be able to say, you know, oh, I'll donate this food. But if you actually know someone who is suffering, ask them if it's okay if you buy them some groceries, you know, take them grocery shopping, get them some stuff, you know, tell them that they're not alone in this place. Tell them that they have someone that they can turn to if they need help. Be that community member, be that friend, not just the next door neighbor. And there are some good examples of great housing that could be built out there that are economically fantastic. You have zero net housing. It pays for itself in no time. You have in Edmonton here, we have Ambrose Place. It's a permanent supportive housing built Indigenous wise, but it's built on a community sense. So they have a teepee room in there to do prayer and services and ceremonies. They have a community lunch room, but you can also have your own lunch in your own apartment, you know. So there's some independence, but there's also that help. I think a lot of places could use that community center within their buildings or their places or their areas, and that would help a lot.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, awesome. Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our webinar today. Thank you very much again to Nadine and Susan. Thank you so much for sharing your hearts and your wisdom. And we hope that this goes far to see that very many people are getting more aware of the different solutions and the different things that different agencies that are doing to see that homelessness is ended in Edmonton. Thank you very much.
It's my honor.
Yeah, we would like to thank each of our speakers, Nadine Chalifoux and Susan McGee, and our wonderful moderator, Bryan Mwaka. We'd like to thank them for sharing their lived experiences and their expertise. And we'd like to thank you, our audience, for being an engaged audience and asking questions and taking part in this really important community conversation. So thank you and good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.